morning, students. In this video, we are going to continue with the poem that is After Blenheim by Robert Southey. So let's discuss the objectives first. So in this video, you will be able to understand critical appreciation, style and literary devices of this poem. So children, let's start with critical appreciation, and the first is title. The title of Southey's poem is quite apt. In order to understand its real import, one has to have the historical background of the battle fought between the English and the French at a small village called Blenheim in 1704. The English who fought and won the battle were assisted by the Austrians and Bavarians. The English fought under the command of the Duke of Marlborough. So Blenheim in the poem comes to refer to this battle between the English and the French. As the poet depicts a scene several years later after the battle was fought there, the title After Blenheim is appropriate. So children, the title of the poem After Blenheim is appropriate and suggestive. It refers to the famous Battle of Blenheim fought in 1704. It condemns the blind patriotism and castigates all wars which only bring out horror, death and destruction. The poet talks about the battle between the English and the French, in which the English fought under the command of the Duke of Marlborough. The poet depicts horrendous after effects and several years later after the battle fought at Blenheim. Thus, the title is appropriate. Now, the next is anti-war poem. It is obvious that any anti-war poem succeeds in its effect only when it deals with the human aspects of the war. It has to be indirect in projecting any anti-war stance. A direct condemnation of war becomes ineffective. Patriotic sentiments are bound to belittle any clear, logical perception of victory won by your side. Students, here condemnation means the expression of very strong disapproval, and belittle means dismiss as unimportant. So, Robert Southey chooses an incident from a simple household to express his response to the war and its victims. By using a simple response of two innocent children to the war, he evokes, that means recalls, pity for the victims and hatred for the war. This technique is employed by many later day poets who wanted to register their opposition to the horrors of war. One is reminded of the dramatic technique employed by Thomas Hardy in his poem, The Man He Killed, a powerful anti-war poem to convey the uselessness of all wars. Yes, quaint and curious war is. You shoot a fellow down. You would treat if met where any bar is, or help to half a crown. So, students, since ancient times, wars have been glorified and the horrors of war have been ignored to make it seem worthwhile and honorable. Here Robert Southey's After Blenheim is an anti-war poem as it successfully deals with the human aspects of the war. Though it does not condemn the war directly, it indirectly projects the war to be something horrifying. Here, the poet gives the simple example of two children and their response to war. The idle boastfulness of heroes who win wars and the futility of war itself is depicted by innocent children. For them, Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene were some shadowy figures in the remote corners of some distant past. Nevertheless, the children were unable to grasp their achievements from a human angle. Thus, the innocent children become the mouthpiece of the poet, who expresses his disapproval of war, and this is what makes the poem an anti-war poem. Now students, moving on to the next is style, and the first is form. After Blenheim is a ballad. That means a poem narrating a story in short stanzas. It is a simple tale involving a conversation between an old man and his two little grandchildren. It begins abruptly, without any attempt at a systematic introduction. It was a summer evening. Old Caspar's work was done, and he, before his cottage door, was sitting in the sun. And by him, spotted on the green, his little grandchild Wilhelmine. The situation is slowly made clear after another little grandchild of old Caspar comes home with a human skull. Now students, here Southey's After Blenheim is an anti-war poem in the form of a ballad. A ballad is a long narrative poem that tells a story. It is a heightened narration that uses different narrative techniques like rhymes and figures of speech. After Blenheim narrates the story of Caspar and his two grandchildren engaged in a conversation about the famous battle in the War of the Spanish Succession that was from 1701 to 1714. Next, like any other ballad, it is impersonal. There is no attempt to show the writer's identity or personality. It keeps up the suspense as is necessary in any tale. The open ending makes it truly objective, though it makes it powerful in its anti-war stance simultaneously. The clash between the opposed viewpoints brought through dialogue works effectively in the tale. Here, this poem is impersonal like any other ballad, that is, it does not show writer's identity or personality, and it keeps up the suspense. And this poem brings about a confrontation between the conventional and instinctive responses to war, that is, the views of the grandfather and the grandchildren respectively. The old man's defense of war is conventional and unacceptable, whereas the child's innocent condemnation of war is natural and instinctive response. Coming up to the next, that is literary devices, and the first is rhyme scheme. The poem has 11 stanzas. Each stanza consists of 6 lines and incorporates a quatrain and a couplet. Students, here quatrain means a stanza of 4 lines, especially one having alternate rhymes, and couplet means 2 lines of poetry next to each other that rhyme. The quatrain has the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B. The couplet is sometimes interlinked with the quatrain, as in the second stanza beginning with She saw her brother Peterkin, or forms a separate unit as in stanza 1, and by him spotted on the green, his little great child Wilhelmine. Here, the last 2 words in the couplet do not rhyme with any rhyming word in the quatrain. Students, here the poem has 11 stanzas and each stanza of the poem contains 6 lines and incorporates a quatrain and a couplet. This end rhyme in each stanza except in the second stanza is A, B, C, B, D, D. That is, the second line rhymes with the fourth and the last two lines rhyme with each other. But in second stanza, the end rhyme is A, B, C, B, B, B. Now students, basically the quatrain has the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B. The couplet is sometimes interlinked with the quatrain. And the next is repetition. Repetition of keywords and phrases is natural in ballad. It is used to put emphasis on some idea or feeling. Old Casper repeatedly describes the horrible battle as the great victory or a famous victory. This repetition brings out effectively the destructive side of war in an ironic perspective. In the poem, After Blenheim, the poet has repeated the phrase the great victory and a famous victory, being ignorant of the purpose of the war, with little variations. It has been used to emphasize the ignorance and complacency of the common man about the purpose of war and the only knowledge that the war was won by their country and the victory was good. Next is language. The language used in the poem is simple, straightforward and colloquial, which means casual. The poet has avoided the use of figurative language in order to maintain the simplicity and innocence involved in the whole situation. Old Casper is a farmer. The other two characters are small children. The unadorned language suits them the most. Here, unadorned means simple. Of course, the poet has varied the line length for dramatic effect. For example, the use of ellipses in stanza 10 effectively conveys the hesitation and lack of confidence on the part of the old man. Students, here the poet has used simple, straightforward style so as to maintain the simplicity and innocence required in the whole situation. The poet talks about the old Casper, who is a farmer, and his grandchildren, Peterkin and Wilhelmine. The poet has kept the language simple and lucid, which is easy to be understood. Moreover, he has varied the line length for the dramatic effect of the poem, and the poet has used ellipses. Students, what is the meaning of ellipsis? Here, ellipsis is a punctuation mark consisting of 3 dots. So, use of ellipsis indicates an intentional omission of a word, sentence, phrase, line or paragraph. So, here the poet has used ellipses in stanza 10, which conveys the hesitation and lack of confidence on the part of the old man. So this brings us to the end of today's session. Now students, you have to read the text and plan 5 stanzas with the help of workbook and note down the meanings of the difficult words in your textbook. Thank you.